Silphium was a plant much loved by the ancient Greeks due to its reported contraceptive, aphrodisiac and abortive properties. It only grew in Cyrenica, now Libya, and was a valuable resource to the ancient Greeks who had settled in the area. It's thought that Silphium went extinct in the 1st or 2nd century CE. However, recently, researchers working in Turkey think they may have found the long-lost plant. Hello and welcome to episode 15 of Amorous Histories podcast. Thank you for joining me. I'm Annie, your host and resident history nerd for the next 20 or so minutes. If it turns out you like what you hear, then you can follow me wherever you get your podcasts, as well as social media. I'm at Amorous Histories on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube and TikTok, and at Amorous Hist Pod on Twitter. You can like, share, comment and all that good stuff to help more people find the podcasts. Transcripts and sources for each show are available on the website amoroushhistories.co.uk, along with links to the bookshop.org affiliate account and some other goodies. Today I'm going to be talking about Silphium, a plant that is considered one of the world's oldest forms of contraception. I think as an adult I'd vaguely heard of a mysterious ancient contraceptive plant that went extinct because humans used it all up. But I really decided I wanted to learn more about Silphium after listening to the first episode of Jessica Cale's podcast, Dirty Sexy History. So go give that a listen afterwards if this episode piques your interest. There's a content warning for you today. I will be talking about abortion, so please be mindful if that, or perhaps pregnancy loss, is a topic that you struggle with. I will stop and give you a heads up right before I quote anything that is bluntly or crudely written though. I have checked how to pronounce all the ancient Greek and Latin words I'm unfamiliar with, but this time period is far beyond my comfort zone, so please do bear with me. Also be aware that when I'm quoting work by ancient Greek writers, that is something that has been translated and edited multiple times over the centuries, so it might come with those translators' or editors' biases, and I would be none the wiser. As always, feel free to send me any corrections if this subject is something you're familiar with and I've made a mistake somewhere. Anyway, enough babbling, let's get going. Silphium, also known as laserwort, laserpithecum, or Silphian to the ancient Greeks, was a plant native to the region around a city called Cyrene, now Shahat, in what is present-day Libya in North Africa. Cyrene was an ancient Greek colony founded in circa 631 BC by migrants from the Greek island of Thera. Their leader, Battus, or Bathu, I'm not quite sure, became the first king, founding the dynasty of the Batiads, who ruled Cyrene for 8 generations until 440 BCE. Although there were ongoing tensions between the Greek settlers and the Libyan natives, Cyrene grew and became a financially strong settlement under the Batiads, exporting goods such as wheat, olive oil, goats, roses, cucumbers, horses, sheep, and Silphium. Until in circa 525 BCE, the city was invaded by the Persians. Dear listener, it's at this point in my research where I, a nerd of the 18th century British history, become completely and utterly confused, asking myself questions such as, why are all the numbers in this timeline going backwards, and why is everyone called Battus or Arcelaeus, and why do the Egyptians keep getting involved? I always strive to provide you with an accurate historical context, but I fear in this instance I may be defeated in my quest. So, my profound apologies to any historians listening who are familiar with North Africa during these centuries. I'm going to boil this down massively. I think the important things you need to know going into this episode are that some Greek migrants travelled to North Africa in the 6th century BCE and settled a colony. This was the city of Cyrene. As ever, there was a lot of politics and fighting, but by the 1st century BCE, so like 4 or 5 centuries later, Cyrene was ruled by the Romans. Silphium, the plant, only grows in North Africa around Cyrene, and Silphium is reportedly extinct by the 1st or 2nd century CE, so that's 6 or 7 centuries after the Greek settlers arrived there. Right, now that's out of the way, let's talk about the plant itself. Silphium is, or rather was, an ancient plant that has come to be known as one of the world's earliest forms of contraception. The Greek botanist Theophrastus noted the likeness between Silphium and Ferula, a group of plants today known as giant fennel. He wrote that Silphium grew to just under 50 centimetres tall on a hollow stalk and had, quote, a great deal of thick root covered in black bark. It has been theorised by some that the giant Tangier fennel, also known as Ferula tingitana, or the giant fennel, also known as Ferula communis, could in fact be Silphium. More recently, a scientific paper published in 2021 asserted that Ferula drudiana could be the long-lost Silphium. More on that later. Silphium was an integral part of Cyrene's economy, and it was a valuable export. Its trade was heavily regulated to ensure its availability and profitability. Its image even appeared on the Cyrenean silver coins for over 3 centuries, which goes to show how important it was to the people who were living and working in that area. So if we try to imagine how Silphium looked for a second, I'm thinking it's a tall green plant with thick hollow stalk, and looking at the coins, when it's shown in bloom, it's got these round, cloud-like flower heads that come off little stalks on the top half of the plant. Perhaps the flowers are yellow, just like the giant fennel Silphium is thought to be related to. As well as having medicinal properties, Silphium was also a sought-after culinary ingredient. The roots were eaten with vinegar, which doesn't sound very appetising, and the stems were roasted or boiled, I assume sort of like asparagus. The sap produced by the plant, called laser, was grated over foods, adding a distinct flavour which became all the rage across the ancient Greek world. It was especially popular in fish recipes where it acted as both a seasoning and a preservative due to its aromatic and reported antibacterial properties. It was even said that animals fed on Silphium produced better tasting meat. In Historia Plantarum, Theophrastus writes that, quote, in those plants whose stem and root are both cut, the stem is cut first, and the juices so obtained are called respectively stalk juice and root juice, of which the latter is the better, for it is clear, transparent, and less liquid. The stalk juice is more liquid, and for this reason they sprinkle meal over it to make it clot. In ancient medical sources, Silphium was claimed to be a bit of a cure-all, reportedly being used to treat respiratory ailments, skin issues, epilepsy, bloating, and dog bites, among other things. It apparently got rid of hair and helped hair grow. And most importantly for this podcast, it was considered a contraceptive, abortive, and perhaps an aphrodisiac. Now we can see why it might have been harvested to extinction. Dioscorides was a Greek botanist and physician living and writing in the 1st century CE. So depending on which academic's work you're reading, that's whilst Silphium was considered to be around. In his work, De Materia Medica, Dioscorides writes about the many medical uses of Silphium. Quote, it cures alopecia by anointing it with wine, pepper and vinegar. It is a good remedy against pain in the teeth. It is put into their concavities, either being put into linen cloth with frankincense and wrapped around the teeth, or washing the mouth with boiled hyssop and figs and vinegar. It is good also for the dog bitten being laid on the wounds, and for the hurts of poisonous beasts and of poisoned arrows being applied on or drunk, for the scorpion smitten being diluted in oil. It is applied on and poured into gangrene parts, scarifying them first though. And it is good for carbuncles if mixed with rue, nitre and honey, or by simply itself. It also helps continued exasperations of the bronchi, and being diluted in water, it clears the voice which has grown suddenly hoarse. It recovers the uvulas being smeared with honey. With mellicrat, it is profitable to gargle for angina, it makes men better coloured being eaten, and it is good for a cough and for pleurisy with egg when drunk. It is given with dry figs as a good remedy for jaundice and the dropsy, and it dissolves rigours being drunk with pepper, frankincense and wine. In their medical preparations, people are using Silphium's roots, stalks and sap, which when combined with flour becomes a gum or resin-like. In many texts, writers are referring to the plant's sap as the juice of Cyrene. Although authors at the time are touting Silphium as a bit of a wonder plant, Dioscorides does note that it causes windiness and is pungent, so perhaps it wasn't something you'd want to go too hard on, especially before a date. Reading the 2022 article Searching for Silphium, an updated review by Lisa Briggs and Jens Jakobsen, they note that in 2004, analysis of Greek and Latin texts that mention Silphium by the Durham University master's student Valentina Asciuti found that no classical authors mentioned that the plant is used as an aphrodisiac. So basically, no one who was writing around the same time and around the same place as Silphium reported that people were using it for arousal. Briggs and Jacobson then call attention to an article by Henry Coper and A.L. Coles from 1999 called "The Silphium Motif Adorning Ancient Libyan Coinage, Marketing a Medicinal Plant." I couldn't access it, unfortunately, but from what I understand, the article suggests that the first references to Silphium being used as an aphrodisiac occur in the 11th century by a writer in Egypt called Ibn Sena, or Avicenna, and then Victorian writers go on to perpetuate this potential misunderstanding. In the article abstract, Coper and Coles also suggest that the phallic shape of the plant appearing on the coins of Cyrene could have led people to conclude that this plant had aphrodisiac properties. The article actually looks really fun, so I'll see if I can find a way to read it. As well as having a phallic stem, depending on who's looking, Silphium seeds are also speculated to be one of the reasons we associate the heart shape with love and romance. The seeds, which can be seen depicted on coins from their era, are the shape of a capital B or a heart symbol, or in my opinion, a butt. The history of how the heart symbol came to be today is a whole other topic that I don't have time for now, so if you're curious, do have a little educated Google. Seemingly Silphium's biggest claim to fame is that it has contraceptive and/or abortive properties, so it could prevent pregnancy and induce abortions in those who are pregnant. Across time and cultures, people's understanding of fertility changes. There are different ideas about when and how conception happens, what's considered an abortion, and what's quote-unquote a normal menstrual cycle. Depending on where you are in the world currently, certain people would have you believe that effective contraception and safe abortion are modern 20th century inventions, and that historically people were only having sex to procreate, not using contraception because it didn't exist, and not having abortions because everyone loved having loads of babies. This is incorrect, and why learning about the history of sex is important, so people can have more accurate understanding of those who have come before us, and then make more informed choices about their own sexual health. One of the articles I read, which was published in the 1990s, said that some knowledge of historical contraceptives may have disappeared because of, quote, the hidden nature of female culture. And to that we say, no, women and trans and non-binary people have been persistently sidelined and removed from history. We are not at all mysterious and magical beings, you just have to pay attention. Needless to say, the writers were men. Anyway, that's all to say, back in ancient Greece, they were writing and thinking about contraception and abortion and acting on their knowledge. Cyrenaeus of Ephesus, who is about at the end of the 1st century and start of the 2nd century CE, has a section in his work Gynecology titled "Whether One Ought to Make Use of Abortives and Contraceptives and How." Before I read the quote, I suggest you skip ahead about a minute and a half if you don't want to hear descriptions of abortion attempts. He writes, quote, "A contraceptive differs from an abortive, for the first does not let conception take place, while the latter destroys what has been conceived. And an expulsive, some say, is synonymous with an abortive. Others, however, say there is a difference, because an expulsive does not mean drugs, but shaking and leaping. For this reason, they say Hippocrates prohibits abortives, yet in his book on the nature of the child, he employs leaping with the heels onto the buttocks for the sake of the expulsion. But a controversy has arisen. For one party banishes abortives, citing the testimony of Hippocrates, who says, 'I will give no one an abortive,' because it is the specific task of medicine to guard and preserve what has been engendered by nature. The other party prescribes abortives, but with discrimination. That is, they do not prescribe them when a person wishes to destroy the embryo because of adultery or out of consideration for youthful beauty, but only to prevent subsequent danger in birth if the uterus is small and not capable of accommodating the complete development, or if the uterus and its orifice has knobbly swellings and fissures." And they say the same about contraceptives as well, and we too agree with them. And since it's safer to prevent conception from taking place than destroy the fetus, we shall now discourse upon such prevention. Cyrenaeus goes on to discuss contraceptives, including a sort of half-assed, probably entirely ineffectual pulling out method where, quote, "when the man is about to discharge the seed, The woman must hold her breath and draw herself away a little, so that the seed may not be hurled too deep into the cavity of the uterus. Or a sort of barrier method in which the woman should, quote, smear the orifice of the uterus all over with old olive oil or honey and cedar resin, or the juice of the balsam tree, alone or together with white lead, and suppositories to, quote, cause the orifice of the uterus to shut before the time of coitus, and do not let the seed pass. He goes on to note 2 recipes including silphium. Quote, moreover, to some people it seems advisable once during the month to drink Cyrenaic balm to the amount of a chickpea in 2 sieves of water for the purpose of inducing menstruation. However, these things not only prevent conception but also destroy any already existing. We can see from Cyrenaicus' writing that there was perhaps some blurring of the lines between contraceptives, abortives, and menstrual regulation. But did silphium actually work? And if so, how did it work? Several scientific studies that took place in the 1980s asserted that 3 species of giant fennel, which is likely to be the plant family silphium was a part of, prevented rats from becoming pregnant. As rats are incredibly physiologically and genetically similar to humans, researchers have suggested that this implies that silphium did work as a contraceptive to some extent. As for giant fennel's effectiveness in people, Briggs and Jacobson write that, quote, the resin of the asafoetida plant has been reported in human tests as acting as a contraceptive and abortifacient. And Miski notes that the giant fennel growing in Turkey reportedly can help treat erectile dysfunction and has aphrodisiac qualities, warning, quote, if short-term commercial exploitation is unchecked, the very large-scale destruction of the roots certainly will drive many endemic ferula species in Turkey to extinction, as has happened with the large population growing on Mount Cassius. It is sadly ironic that some giant fennel has been driven to the brink of extinction by humans overharvesting it to help themselves out in the bedroom. Despite its popularity and widespread use, silphium faced challenges. It's thought overharvesting and environmental changes in the Cyrene region led to its gradual decline. By the 1st century CE, the plant had become exceedingly rare, and it was considered extinct since the 2nd century. Because of the plant's extensive uses, it is thought that humans being humans is to blame for its disappearance. It's likely that even though the Greek government had strict rules on the amount of silphium that could be harvested, the Romans ignored those rules and overharvested it, pushing it to extinction. It appears that despite all of the people who tried to cultivate silphium, it was quite a fussy plant and would only grow in specific areas of Cyrene. It's also been suggested that silphium may have been a hybrid between 2 different species of giant fennel exclusive to that geographic area. So when farmers tried to grow it from seed, they were unsuccessful because the seeds were actually, ironically, sterile. Alongside impacts from human activity, silphium's extinction sort of coincided with the rise in temperatures known as the Roman warm period. A climate event like this could very well have been partially or wholly to blame for the loss of a plant such as silphium that only grew in a specific set of conditions. When Pliny the Elder is writing Natural Histories, which was completed in circa 77 CE, he says of silphium, quote, for these many years past, however, it has not been found in Cyrenaica, as the farmers of the revenue who hold the lands there on lease have a notion that it is more profitable to depasture flocks of sheep upon them. Within the memory of the present generation, a single stalk is all that has ever been found, and that was sent as a curiosity to the Emperor Nero. He continues, quote, for this long time past there has been no other laser imported into this country, but that produced in either Persis, Media, or Armenia, where it grows in considerable abundance, though much inferior to that of Cyrenaica. If Pliny's writing reflects accurately the time period in which silphium plant is lost, that would make it the first recorded species extinction in history. However, some people writing in the 4th century CE, such as Synesius of Cyrene, make reference to silphium shipments happening in their lifetime. Could they have meant a different, similar plant, as we've seen in other works of writing, or was silphium still around? The 2021 article Next Chapter in the Legend of Silphium by Miski suggests that Silphium, or a Silphium-like plant, is still around in Turkey today. A rare ferula species called F. druidiana was found in 3 former Greek villages in the Anatolia region of Turkey. Studies comparing the structure, appearance and descriptions of the plant with those of Silphium suggest that the 2 plants are related. Miski concludes that similarities between the plant's pharmacological and medicinal usages as well as archaeobotanical evidence strongly suggest that F. druidiana is Silphium. So, there you have it. Plant power may have been helping out the ancient Greeks in the bedroom, as well as preventing pregnancies. Will we ever be able to prove Silphium did or didn't go extinct? I don't know. It seems like a long shot. Perhaps one day we'll learn more about this mysterious plant humans have been confused and obsessed with for centuries. Some of the sources I used to write this episode were Searching for Silphium, an updated review by Lisa Briggs and Jens Jakobsen, published in Heritage in 2022, and Next Chapter in the Legend of Silphium, preliminary morphological, chemical, biological and pharmacological evaluations, initial conservation studies and reassessment of the regional extinction event by Mahmut Miski, published in Plants in 2021. And you can find the rest of the sources on my website. Please forgive me if I seemed a little rusty in this episode. I started writing this script in 2023, and that was also the last time I recorded. Hopefully it turns out okay. If you like this episode, please leave Amorous Histories a little review or some stars on your podcast app or website. You should be able to find me wherever you get your podcasts, and can also follow my socials at Amorous Histories on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube and TikTok, and at Amorous Histpod on Twitter. Transcripts and sources are at amoroushistories.co.uk. Please feel free to DM me or email amoroushistories@gmail.com if you have any questions, episode suggestions or want to collab.